And we know from the Neurology that there are antibodies in the brain that accidentally get triggered because of gluten. Gliadin is an autoantibody and it causes autoantibodies. So we got her off of gluten, we got her off of dairy, and she started communicating within weeks. The parents couldn't believe it. She was sitting still, she was communicating.
If you're a healthcare provider tired of just treating symptoms and ready to dig deeper into the root causes of health issues, the Vibrant Wellness Podcast is for you. With insider tips, expert interviews, and the latest in biotech research, this podcast will take your patient care to the next level. Good morning, everyone. Dr. Emmy, how are you doing today?
I'm feeling good, Jen. How about you?
I am feeling awesome as well because we have an extremely special guest today. Today, we are going to embark on an exciting journey into the world of neurological health and healing with a remarkable practitioner who's here to uplift your spirits and nourish your brain. Join us as we introduce the one and only Dr. B.G. Mancini. With a name as unique as her story, Dr. B, as her patient affectionately call her, brings a vibrant energy and a wealth of knowledge to our podcast today. From her early adventures with superfoods and juicing to becoming a passionate advocate for neurological development, Dr. BG's journey is a colorful and healing one. So fasten your seatbelts as you prepare for a captivating conversation filled with insights, laughter, and the secret ingredients to unlocking your brain's hidden potential. Dr. BG, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you, ladies. So glad to be here.
Yes, we are excited to have you. I want to jump right in. Now, you have quite the resume. You're a licensed Oriental medicine and acupuncture physician, functional medicine practitioner, neurodevelopmental specialist, and a primary care provider for children and families. So explain to us, I've read a little bit of your background, but tell the audience, how did your childhood experiences with healthy food shape your career path?
Sure, I'd love to. So my dad was pioneer in health, even though he was not in this field. He was one of the first subscribers to Life Extension, the company for nutrition. We had vitamins the size of my thumb that he used to have to smash up with a meat tenderizer to get me to take them. And, his refrigerator was filled with green bites and wheatgrass and, we grew sprouts, and I still have his juicer 45 years later. They don't make them like that anymore. And so, he was always teaching us about breathing exercises and about nutrition and don't eat sugar because it eats holes in your throat. So that was sort of my grounding. And then, when I was around 15, I found some books of his. One was by Arnold Ehret, and one was called The Grape Cure. And these are from the 1920s. And it was talking about how, eating dairy is going to create mucus in your body, and how the Grape Cure, a mono diet, is going to detox your body. And so I started experimenting with all of this for myself. And eventually that led me to, really diving into chronic illness right around 21 with one of my teachers.
That's pretty remarkable. And I love that your dad was ahead of the curve, it seems like, with his knowledge and expertise. That's great. Well, I love when one of the taglines on your website for the Brain and Gut Institute, which we will get into, you say, we share how to create neurological, physical, and emotional balance in an unbalanced world. Tell us a little bit more about how you came about with the Brain and Gut Institute and what exciting things are coming up with that.
So one of the things, when I started practicing Oriental medicine 15 years ago, and my demographic was women between the age of, let's say, 30 and 45. And things were going great in my practice. And then I started asking them, hey, how are your kids? And inevitably, I got the same answer time and time again, which was, they're great, except one has ADHD, one's on medication, one has anxiety, one doesn't sleep, and one is red, all these different things. And I went, my gosh, what is going on here? And that, that really sort of shifted my practice into more of a family practice, because I think we would all agree that in order for our adult patients to feel really well and can be able to connect with their children, we have to make sure that their children are doing well too.
Yeah. And before we move on, I'm curious, with the Brain and Gut Institute, Dr. BG, do you have a practitioner course? Is that right?
We do. We have a practitioner course, and we just got approved for our CEUs as well. And part of what it does is it's empowering practitioners to feel like children are not the little aliens we think they are. Sometimes in our practice, we don't want to talk about kids, but really the way that medicine is right now, I feel like becoming the primary care providers and information sources for our adult patients. Even if you just know the words that your patient says, my child has been experiencing X, Y, and Z. Even if you don't want to treat that, if you can say, oh, a developmental optometrist or interactive metronome, or these resources may be helpful, that is so far ahead of what other people are providing. So we want to give practitioners this language, because as a parent, if you give me the right referral, you've solved my problem, really. So, for those who want to actually work with kids, for those who don't, who want to just be a practitioner who can provide more different neurological resources for kids. So we created the course for that. And we really go into also what I created called the family nervous system. So we understand sort of the whole pathway between how a parent's nervous system informs and helps to develop the children's. Um, and so, yeah, it's been really exciting. We've created a certification and we've had 11 graduates so far. We just started a month and a half ago, and that's huge for us. Getting the word out for helping kids is really, that's our goal.
That's awesome. And so know your resources. This is a major resource, obviously, for practitioners who want to learn more themselves. And let's get into a little bit more of the specifics of your work. Can you give us a rundown of what role the vagus nerve plays in the neurological development of children? I kind of want to start with children, and then we'll talk about the adults and caregivers and parents,
Sure.
obviously, too.
Sure. So I'll start with the cerebellum. So the cerebellum, obviously in the back of the brain, and what happens is during the serve and return of a mother or caregiver to their baby, right? That intimate connection where there is that give and take, there is a reciprocity. The parent is present because the baby is always present. The parent is present. There is a different development that happens in the cerebellum than when there's not that reciprocity. So just to broaden that perspective for a moment, if you think about our adult patients who are physically uncomfortable in their body, emotionally uncomfortable, and their brains are inflamed, right? And they're using all of these outlets, like being on their devices, they're eating foods that make them even more inflamed. Where is that ability to stay present in their own bodies so that they can then engage with the child? There's so many more distractions and outlets now than there ever were. So if they're not able to be present with the baby's cerebellum is actually developing differently now. And so that cue of safety that is supposed to come from the parent, the primary caregiver, whoever it is, to then feed that nervous system to develop its resilience so that all of the other things that they have to deal with, even loud sounds and bright images, and then stress and trauma of the family dynamic, toxins, all the other things we all know about, right? It makes them more resilient to do that.
Absolutely. And just the holistic work that functional medicine practitioners do, we think about the individual. We don't necessarily think about the family. So I think this is such a valuable and unique perspective that you're giving us today. And you mentioned several factors, right? So there's dietary, environmental toxicity, trauma, all of those things. What's your favorite way to assess? Do you have a questionnaire to hit on all of those? It's so much for initial intake, I imagine.
It is. And I've had to shorten it over the years. So, it depends, of course. I do a little discovery call and sort of understand what the family needs and then send them the intake paperwork. But I try and narrow it down because it depends. With babies, it's one thing. Because with babies, you can see sometimes I'll have the family send me videos because if their hand is still clenched at 6 months or their crawl is not equilateral, okay, that's already telling us that there is a disconnection or not enough pathways that are forming in the brain to make an equilateral crawl. And so we're already seeing it. I've been doing this long enough now that we can see when that's happening, that this happens next and this happens next. So part of what, for the practitioners who actually want to work with children or who are parents and just want more information for themselves, really, understanding what children are presenting with, they're showing us right in front of our eyes, but we don't know it. When people talk about, I'll just give this example because it's one everyone can relate to, rolling over in the crib. That's a milestone, right? But many babies don't actually roll. What they do is they use gravity and fall over. Movement is supposed to start with the visual system. The eyes are supposed to move, turn the head, and then the body, spine, rotate and articulate, and the body can move over. So much of the dysfunction that kids are having now is because they're not actually developing their visual system properly. That affects their mobility. Then they're not crawling properly. And crawling is something we use to rehabilitate stroke victims, stroke patients, because we know that that scaffolds the brain's pathways, right?
Yeah. So looking for those signs, so important. And if we were to put a name on these conditions, or if we wanted, if you had a parent coming in with a child who had already been diagnosed, what do you see? Is ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, what other things?
So a lot of autism, we see that. A lot of missed milestones and developmental delays. A lot of inability to regulate their emotional system in a way that they're able to, as this is how I like to say it. The goal of everything that I do, whether it's with a child or an adult, but this I'm going to specify for kids, is so that we can make them as comfortable in their brains and bodies as possible, so they can more deeply connect with themselves and have a rich inner life, then deeply connect with their families, which changes the entire dynamic, and then deeply connect with the world around that. So in order to do that, for each individual in the family, we have to either remove certain things, add in certain support. And I feel like over the years, it's grown past diet and supplementation at this point. We have to be using the mobility pathways in the brain. We have to use all the other tools, the photobiomodulation, the auditory programs for the nervous system, all those other tools.
And can you speak to, I know there's a specific system that you use, SSP, is that correct? Safe and Sound Protocol. What is that about?
So the SSP program was created by Dr. Porges. He is the founder of the polyvagal theory. He is the one who added to the fight flight, he added freeze, shut down dorsal. He's really pioneered and is informing all of what trauma therapy is being performed as right now. So it's really about building cues of safety into the nervous system so that you're then unlocking your ability to then be socially engaged, curious, open, and connecting again. And so he started his work with PTSD soldiers and autism many years ago. He was not clinical, he was research. And so he developed this program, and I use it all the time. I mean, I refer it out to a lot of my therapists now, but it's essentially a 5-hour listening program. And the remarkable thing is that when I've used it with soldiers who haven't slept in years, who have rage issues with their families, who are, completely shut down, there are turnarounds in weeks where they're like, I can't understand how this is happening. I'm walking around the base saying, I don't know, she put some music on me and I'm sleeping now, and, for autistic children, there are several protocols that we use that have been really profound. In addition to the SSP, I've had nonverbal children more often than not start to speak after this, because again, it's really the way he filtered this music. It provides direct cues of safety to the nervous system, as if a regulated mother was talking to their infant child. So if you just take a moment and imagine what that would feel like for your nervous system, and taking that in, it turns out that with autism, many times, and I want to be, I've been in touch with the autistic adult community a little bit more lately, so I want to just say this. Autism is not something that has to be cured. It's a different neurological wiring in the brain. However, the coexisting conditions or comorbid, they're still debating how they want that phrase. It is consistent, as we know, that there are certain biomarkers, there's certain neurological markers and symptoms that come along with that wiring. And that's what I seek to help them with so they can feel more comfortable.
Or really improving quality of life, I imagine.
Yes.
Sure.
Well, that's a beautiful segue into your work now with a little bit more of adults. And I know as adults, we tend to come with some extra baggage, right? We're carrying decades of extra trauma, toxicity. How does your work with adults, if at all, differ from that with children?
So I'll go back to when I first learned about patterning through mobility to actually heal the brain. My niece had a brain injury. I was only around 15 years old. And I learned there's an institute in Philadelphia. It's still there. The owner, the creator of the institute has passed, Glenn Doman. And what he had figured out was that through frequency, intensity, and duration of exercises, that he was able to help Down syndrome children, autistic children, stroke patients, and many more with severe TBIs to work around the injury. Because as we know, the way that the brain heals or uses its neuroplasticity is to fire and wire systems together. And that creates the scaffolding. For her, we were building crawling tracks. She was crawling, by the age of 2 years old, she was running a mile and a half because that cross patterning was healing her brain and creating opportunities, for adults with neurological injuries to increase their oxygen intake. How do we do that? Are they sleeping with their mouths open? Are they getting enough exercise? Are they breathing in the right way? So incorporating these other tools that help to give them the optimum amount of energy for the brain, and then adding in these firewire exercises.
It's really interesting. Do you do a lot of breath work with your patients? I'm just curious. I know we could go down a rabbit hole here, but I'm intrigued by that.
No, but Jen, you can call me and we'll do one. So my dad actually, he taught us a lot of breath work and something called the heartbeat meditation, where you can move the heartbeat all around your body and increase blood flow. So I do point the patients to different resources for that. I don't do it with them personally, but I do occasionally do a class. We'll do a webinar and take the practitioners and parents through it, because I know for myself, I need constant reminding to regulate myself and to find co-regulation with my colleagues, with my friends, with my family. It's really important for me to remember.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's one of those simple things that we have access to at any time. So that's why I always enjoy diving into that. But I'd love for you to share, if you wouldn't mind, maybe a client success story or two, someone who really sticks out, a patient that you've worked with, whether it's a child or an adult from the past.
Sure, I'd love to. Think of this one little girl. She came to me. She was unable to be, engaged and touched by her mom. She was diagnosed on the autism spectrum. Unfortunately, a lot of times what's happening with children is they're getting diagnosed in adios, I call it, because there are not a lot of resources that general physicians have, even gastroenterologists, the tools that we're talking about here that actually move the needle, right? So she had been passed around for several years. She was born with microcephaly, and her brain was not given the space to grow, right? And we started changing her diet, first of all. So number one, if we look at the neural zoomer, one of the things, and the wheat zoomer, one of the things it shows us is what is the reaction to wheat? And we know from the neural zoomer that there are antibodies in the brain that accidentally get triggered because of gluten. Gliadin is an autoantibody, and it causes autoantibodies. So we got her off of gluten, we got her off of dairy, and she started communicating within weeks. The parents couldn't believe it. She was sitting still. She was communicating. We got the SST on her. Now she allowed her mom to hug her, with tears from the mom. She actually does equine therapy. I work more abroad than local, but she does equine therapy right near me. So the mom was like, "Oh, why don't you come over and meet us?" Because most of my work is by Zoom. And so different. This child was like alive and enjoying the horses and communicating. Will she always have different wiring? Sure, but that's fine. We all have neurological injuries and things that we work around, sound sensitivities, light sensitivities, whatever it is, just to see that transformation. And that's really, it's not like this works. Obviously, everything works so differently with each patient, but without looking at what dietary triggers are causing inflammation, without looking at, is it hemispheric integration that needs to happen through these mobility exercises? Because that was the other thing she did. She did a 9-week intensive exercise program with her mom using Syntonics glasses, which are colored lenses, which also have significant impact on the brain's development. And they would do it every single morning, 20 minutes, and it's been amazing.
That's so cool. That sounds like functional neurology. I know they have all sorts of interesting exercises and practices and technology now in functional neurology. Is that something they use as well in those
It is,
offices?
yeah. And one of my colleagues in the Brain Gut Institute, she's a developmental optometrist. So we've come up with programs on, how to make it as simple as possible for parents to do. Or for the parents who don't want to do it themselves, she'll do it with them online, or one of her interns will do it with them. And And yeah, I don't know, this doesn't have a name exactly because it's just really, it's pulling together all the things that I've come across and learned from other people. And it's not that any of these things are proprietarily mine. It's just, hey, if we add them in and sequence them in a certain way, it's not just 15 years ago or 20 years ago, it might have been, okay, quick, do a parasite cleanse, then treat candida, then do this, and right. And so, or it has to be mold if nothing else is working. But sometimes what I found is that the pathways aren't developed enough in the brain to carry all the great work that the body was doing in recovery, or the nervous system was so traumatized that the body was getting healthier, but the symptoms weren't going away.
So it's this other layer, really this neurological layer that oftentimes is overlooked. And I think just a lot of practitioners don't know where to begin. So this is so helpful that you're giving keywords, you're pointing out different tools, and reminding practitioners it's okay to collaborate, coordinate care. That's so important. So thank you for that. What about polyvagus theory? I heard you talk about this. You gave a great analogy, and I found this really fascinating. How does this relate to the work you do? And can you walk us through that, please?
So the polyvagal theory is, again, that was from Dr. Porges, and there's so much beautiful information out there. What he really shared is that the communication as humans, we have evolved as social beings. And just because we forgot that over the past 50 years or 40 years, 30 years, during the Industrial Revolution, when everyone moved out of these multi-family units and into single family homes, broken off from different communication with elders and younger generations and all this sort of thing, we lost this interconnected ability and the sense of community. And so now, and I always think of it this way, when I'm standing there cooking dinner at my house, I picture a camera above my head. And there's me, the mom with the two kids doing my thing. And then it pulls up and there's all the families down the street doing the exact same thing on their own. And then there's everyone isolated doing the same things. Whereas in communities, everyone used to do it together and it was more of a supported, joyful event, not a slog sometimes like it is, So, so the polyvagal theory says you're social communicators. And part of that comes from the way we communicate with our face and our voice. So if a smile does not meet the eyes, okay, that is actually a trigger of non-safety to your emotional system. So we're driving in my car 2 years ago, my son was 5 and he looked over at the bus and they have those attorneys, big smiles on their faces. So my son goes, "Whoa, that's weird." I said, "What?" He said, "Look at his face. He has big teeth going like this, but his eyes are doing nothing." He was trying to put in. They had photoshopped out, right, the connection here. And he read it as a threat. He just kept saying, "That's so weird." So, children know. And if you want to think about what COVID did for communication with children's nervous systems, right, like the mask, that sent them so many cues of disconnection. And that affected the way their brains were developing. And I want to comment one more thing, but I don't want to talk too long.
Please.
All right. So milestones, I'm not sure if anyone knows this, but the milestones from the CDC were changed almost a year and a half ago now. They took out crawling as a milestone. They delayed 3, 6, and 9 months, many of the milestones that children were supposed to meet because of the profound amount of delayed and missed milestones that children were having. They said, okay, instead of looking at why this is happening, we're going to just push them out and delay. It basically delays diagnosis. And neuroplasticity in children, you can use their brains to heal so quickly, just using these repatterning exercises, using these tools that pick up the ATP in the brain. So now we have children, we're going to go longer and longer without diagnosis, without getting these skills and these tools that can really help them.
Yeah. And you mentioned this concept of safety. And I've heard you say you can't think your way into safety. And this is so profound. And I think it really brings to light the importance of sensory work that you advocate for, such as SSP, craniosacral, acupuncture, etc. So I'm wondering, how come this very cerebral act of trying to rationalize negative feelings, often seen in anxiety, of course, for example, why doesn't that work to calm the nervous system? What's your take on that? I'm really interested.
Because it's repatterning your trauma. Every time you talk about your trauma, you're your brilliant brain is sending the exact cues of hormonal cocktail that you experienced the first time. So you are re-experiencing it every time that you talk about it. And saying it again and again is re-embedding it. It is making those loops in your brain more solidified. Whereas when we are able to get enough safety tangibly into our body, even if it's fleeting, a few moments, where a co-regulated therapist or somatic experiencer or friend, can give us that space to feel safe, we're able to then bloom those cocktail of good hormones, right? There's limbic retraining, which is a big thing that I use for my adult patients. There's a couple great programs out there. DNRS is one of them, the Gupta program, and people say, well, why does it work? Because they have you sit there with the greatest thought you ever had that made you feel the warmest and fuzziest, and then let those hormones, because your brain is going to obey your thought and it's going to allow that to cascade through you. And we all know that if, you're thinking positively, we can see on the fMRIs now, if you have positive thoughts, your brain lights up one way and it produces inflammation. If you are thinking negative thoughts, getting yelled at or around something negative, your brain lights up in a different way.
And is there an association with the trauma though? Because if you have the sensory experience, for example, you have the music or the SSP, is there a reason to associate or bring up the trauma so that you can maybe heal that trauma? Or is it really just getting practice of doing those sensory practices for positive thinking?
So interestingly, what you're speaking about reminds me of EMDR, where you're using, my friend left her tappers here, where you're feeling the interactive. And it's another tool that I love to use with kids because they don't have to do anything, right? That sand trade therapy is profoundly useful for trauma for kids and adults. So what you're speaking about with SSP, you actually don't have to think of anything. We want you to just sit there and draw or doodle, play with sand and Legos. It doesn't matter. Getting out of your brain, getting out of the thinking and allowing this music to just do what it does. Because what he did was he removed the lower frequencies that our nervous systems through evolution associate with threat, like growling animals. Music goes all over the board, right? In a song. So it just sounds like either he put it into one set is Disney music for kids, and one set is like a mix of 90s music. So you don't really hear anything different, but it's very, very quiet. And sometimes the sound gets lower and sometimes it gets a little higher because it's training you to properly pick up the cues of sound around you. Because of neuroception, our neuroception, I'll send you guys a video after. This 7-year-old posted this great video. She and her mom took my family nervous system course. And she says, neuroception is like a radar and scanning around your body. And it's telling you whether you're safe or not. And it's going, and what happens is when your vagus nerve is not in a safe place, it will pick up a safe cue as threat. That's it. So people walking through the mall, people walking down the street, a neutral face will be interpreted as threat and constantly feel under attack in your body and your brain. Whereas once your vagus picks up and is more resilient, not only are you less reactive, but also you will start to feel like the world is on your side again.
I love that. And I wonder if you can elaborate a little bit more in terms of what safety feels like in that way, because people who are stuck in the sympathetic nervous system mode for so long, it's chronic. What does it finally feel like to have the vagus nerve working properly and safely?
So I would have to say probably different for each person, right? I can tell you that, as I said before, we can't imagine. I remember when I was having a really tough time post-pregnancy, post my second one, and I was with this group of women and there were birds singing outside and everyone wanted to do a quick meditation. And I was like, great. And I couldn't hear the birds. All I could hear was the craziness in my head. But everyone was sort of talking about what they experienced afterwards. And she said, oh, I was listening to the birds. And I could hear the joy coming through her. And I was like, okay, I didn't hear that, but I feel this. And I'm going to just stick with what I can feel, right? So when we're talking about each of our experience, I again, with the soldier who's able to sleep, You can't theorize what safety feels like. But if you are walking around in your daily life feeling like on edge and anything can set you into anxiety, or there's constant depression, and then all the vagus nerve physical symptoms, gastroparesis issues, bowel motility, um, overreactivity to sensory sounds, to sounds. And, you can look for cues of, am I living my life in a more curious, open, and engaged place? Or is my default this fight flight? And then right below that is this shutdown. Am I living in these two places, or am I sort of living in these two places? And just start to incorporate these tools. Most of them are passive. That's the wonderful thing.
Yeah. And I love what you said, tangible tools earlier. And you don't think about music as being tangible, but that feeling is very tangible. I mean, at least for me, music is extremely important for me, especially when I'm alone. It gives you a sense of joy and peace and safety, really, too. So I totally get that. What do you think about vagal nerve stimulators?
So there is one I also use by Dr. Nemechek, who also created one of the protocols I use with my autistic patients. I encourage anyone who doesn't know about him to look him up, especially if you work with autistic kids or have friends, family who have that in their families. So the VNS it's a very useful device. I use it differently than I use the SSP, because the SSP is an auditory vagus nerve stimulator. It really is. So whereas the VNS gets clipped onto the outside of the ear, it doesn't necessarily send cues of safety to the nervous system. So anything that's electronic, especially for more sensitive patients, can tend to skew their input. It can overwhelm their system. But vagus nerve stimulators for some of my symptomatic patients for certain things, I mean, they're fantastic. But I tend to work with the lowest intervention, the most simple intervention first, and really allow the wisdom of the body to do what it does. So if it can just use the sounds instead of the electric medicine, then I'll allow it to do that. If not, then again, it's all about sequencing. How do we layer in the right support at the right time?
Sure. Such a good reminder. Really start with the gentlest, least invasive therapies first. See how the body responds. That's a very naturopathic medicine concept, also. So I totally get that too. So I want to go back a little bit to the family dynamic. So a parent's well-regulated autonomic nervous system can really impact their children's. And this is where the family nervous system comes into play. And so what is the family nervous system? And what is that evolutionary benefit?
So the family nervous system I created because while I was, it's kind of evolved. First, it was working with the moms. Then I started working with more children, but then the moms had to come in. And quick note, we used to use SSP with the kids first. But then what we figured out is that the moms were completely dysregulated, because as moms or as parents, I call it PPSD. It's postpartum stress disorder. So, we're designed to hear a peep 2,000 square feet away and basically remain in fight and flight unless we address that. So now we do the moms first and find that the children already start to shift significantly. And the reason that is because babies' nervous systems are unformed. And essentially, they are a blank slate that is going to find the parent's nervous system at the level it is. So if a parent's nervous system is in fight and flight, shut down, constant stress, anxiety, okay, that child is not going to suddenly learn how to be open, engaged, curious, and regulated. Okay, that does not happen naturally. What happens is that child's nervous system basically records what they're being exposed to, and then that is what they're playing all the time. So for parents to be able to, and it's hard. I mean, we all want a simple solution. Like, just tell me how to make my kid do this, or tell me how to, make myself feel better. But the reality is that if we don't start addressing the parental connection in a home with our adult patients, the younger generation, I'm really concerned with what's going to happen. So on the upside of that, if we can include something like the family nervous system, where I sort of walk parents through just knowing, hey, here's the process of how this happens. Parents are willing to do anything for their kids. Parents will not take care of themselves for themselves. But when they find out you taking that 2-minute break or you having this communication with your child to say, I'm having a hard time. Or, hey, let's, like I told you guys before, my 7-year-old said, hey, mom, let's do some jumping jacks because moving a muscle changes our thoughts. And integrating these things, put Post-its up, put notes around. Um, Family life is an interesting dynamic for everyone, and reminders of those tools throughout the day and giving children this language will benefit everybody. And you're setting them up for a lifetime of being able to regulate and understand their emotions, as opposed to being stuck where we are sometimes and not using that language. And then they just record that as children. And then we get mad that they can't self-regulate.
It's such a gift early on in a child's life. And yeah, I just wish everyone knew this information. So it's awesome.
Well, yes. And now I'm asking the question, like, because I have to assume, Dr. BG, there's people listening that are thinking, okay, well, I royally screwed up my kids. I have 3 girls, and I know with each one, I was in a different season, and it makes me really question. So what would you say to that parent that maybe their children are past the age of 7, where they say you develop the most, or maybe they're out of the house? What would you say to them that they can do right now that might still help them and their children?
Mhm. So really interesting. So this just happened. A woman came to me and she had a very tumultuous experience with her stepmother. Like growing up, it was always like this really contentious relationship. They were never close. And the stepmother decided to do SSP. Okay. So picture like mom and child, whatever dynamic you put it into. So the stepmother did SSP, and all of a sudden my patient was having a better relationship with her. She felt more trusting and open of this dynamic, right? So if the parent at any age can shift themselves, if we talk about how frequency medicine works, if we shift our frequency, that changes how people are engaging with us, whether they're down the 3 states away or whether they're 3 doors down in the house. And so, the sound, we can record this. This is evidenced in clinical research. The frequency of our nervous system looks like a certain pitch, right? And if we shift what that looks like, people experience us completely differently.
That is so true. And I have read a lot about that. You're right. You kind of increase your frequency, and it emanates differently, and people react to you differently. So that is a beautiful way of putting that. Makes me hopeful. I just got to keep my energy up, my frequency.
It's something that we can continuously work on, no matter how old or how old the children are. It's
Well,
really
yeah. And as
important.
parents, you're always second guessing, did I do it right? Did I do it wrong? What can I do better? So I love that answer. Gives us all hope. Yes.
Jen, second guess, like in the moment, I'll say something. Sometimes I think to myself, no matter which way I went with that, they'll end up in therapy complaining about it.
Right.
No matter what I did. So,
Yeah.
I try and just give them as many of these tools. And the rip and repair is something that I talk a lot about. Rip and repair is when you and your kids or whomever have had that argument. What does it look like when you come back together and how quickly you can do that? And my little 10-year-old said to me a couple of nights ago, he said, well, it's kind of like this, mom. I said, do you know what rip and repair means? And he said, yes. He said, it's kind of like this. When I go to my workout, 'cause he does Taekwondo, and I, use my muscles, and then the next day I'm kind of sore because the muscle has ripped, but then at the end of it, it's gotten bigger and stronger. And so that's what the rip and repair is in our relationships, right? And as long as we're reconnecting and taking that intentionality to do that with ourselves and with our children, and of course, everyone else in our lives, I feel like we really do have this opportunity for growing those relationships as opposed to creating more shame and more separation.
Yeah. That's beautiful. If you wouldn't mind, take a few minutes, Dr. BG, and tell us just some of the skills that you implement in your family. I know you mentioned a few already, but what is it you feel like you do day to day to kind of strengthen those relationships as your own family nervous system?
So, again, each season has been a bit different. I did a lot of the neurological development work with them as children, cross patterning, uh, a lot of movement, rolling, spinning. And I do have a free course where parents are welcome to sign on, practitioners can sign on the website, where you can see a lot of the tools that I use with them. even stimulating the visual system, because the eye is just a muscle sending in signals. What is the brain doing with that information? How to develop the auditory system, because those are tools that babies, in order to feel safe and regulated in the world, they need their senses to come online. And they're not coming online as quickly as they used to. So those are tools that they can look up on the website that I use all of them with my kids. And then, it depends. When my youngest one is having some attention and focus stuff, I put him on interactive metronome. We have the unit at home. Sometimes if I feel like he's got too much bounce in him, I put him on the trampoline. I have him call out numbers while he's doing it, because fire and wire together. Right? There's all different tools. And plus I have a journal that I'll do with them, mom and son journals, where I thought it was going to be the serious thing, but we actually just laugh our way through it. One page every couple of days. And it's really like a nice, funny thing for us to for them to get to know me in a different context too. And I'm trying to think what else. I mean, we do SSP once a year. I do that with them. There's the ILS listening system, which is fantastic. I've used that at different times. My oldest son is really driven and focused, but he gets stressed. And I feel like these kids, I don't know if I just didn't know this as a kid, but I see my children and they're such little adults and they're having all the same, hey, my back hurts because I slept on a bad mattress last night, Mom. Can you do some adjustments on me? Sure. I'm feeling stressed because I have all this mouth work. What can we do for that? And I don't know if it's just that my kids have that language and many kids don't. And that's part of why I want to give this to more practitioners, to get this out to more parents. Because if we give them those tools when they're younger, with all of the onslaught of the bigger toxins, the more noise pollution, the more visual onslaught, the social media affecting their self-esteem, the constant engagement with their apps and games and all of that, the poor sleep, the acne that all the kids have now, all these different things. If we start to give them this language or give it to the parents, download some of the stuff that I have and just give it to the parents and, let them do with it as they please, but at least we're getting that information into the home and giving kids a chance to enjoy their lives without all of these really physical and neurological barriers to their joy and connection, which I feel like a lot of them have.
Absolutely. It's such a crazy world today. So much to contend with.
So much to contend with. That's what I was trying to say. I mean, you just said it much more. Thank you.
No, but we needed to point out the specifics. So thank you, Dr. BG. And with that, we're going to wrap it up. There's so much to unpack. I think we might want to do another one with you because it's such a fascinating and important topic. So Dr. BG, thank you so much for joining us today, sharing your wisdom on an issue that impacts so many of us, yet may never be addressed. Today, we learn the essential role the vagus nerve plays in neurological development for children and neurological recovery in adult parents and caregivers, while highlighting easy and effective management tools such as SSP to optimize family relationships. To learn more about Dr. BG's continuing education course and more, please visit her website, www.braingutinstitute.com, where you can also sign up for her Clinical Pearls newsletter. Okay, so it's that time, Dr. BG. We like to switch gears at the end of our podcast and ask 3 rapid fire questions to learn a little bit about you that are non-clinical in nature. What do you think? Are you game?
Ready.
Wonderful. Okay, first one, there's only 3. If you could dine with anyone alive or past, who would it be and why?
Gosh. All right. So Michio Kushi, who was one of my first teachers 30 years ago, because I still have so many questions from what he taught us. I feel like I missed so many opportunities with him, and I would say it was him. Where's he from? He was in Boston. He was the founder of Macrobiotics in America. He's the one who I did the Smithsonian project based around. He was teaching us no gluten, no dairy, eat fermented foods, lycopene, cook your tomatoes, and all of that 30 years ago. I mean, he was so ahead of the curve.
Awesome.
Wow. All right. Second question, Dr. BG, what's your ideal way to spend 10 minutes of just me time?
Sitting in my backyard and focusing on the different birds that I can hear. That is one of my ways of meditation.
Lovely.
Practicing awareness. I love it. All right. Last one. What is the worst advice you've ever gotten?
Don't do that. when I had when I had ideas that, I thought were great and I was a lot younger and people just said, "Oh, that's never going to work." And I doubted, doubted the ability, doubted the wisdom to try and trust my own intuition. And believe me, I have not gotten it right so many times. And, it is a constant struggle sometimes to figure out the right way to proceed with stuff. But now what I would want my kids to hear is don't listen to anyone else. Do it anyway. Obviously, if it's not dangerous. If an idea comes to you, it's coming from somewhere and it's landing in your head for a reason. And go ahead and try and put it out there.
Yeah. I love it.
So inspiring.
Yes. Well, we cannot thank you enough. I absolutely enjoyed this conversation. I've learned so much from you. We definitely want to have you back. And I know Emmy already touched on your website. Is there anything else you wanted to share with the audience before we departed?
I know it's been a pleasure talking with you ladies. You can find me at Brainbed Institute on Instagram. I tend to be a little more active on there. And you can also find the free download of the course and, the CEU course for practitioners.
Well, on that note, we would just want to thank our listeners for being here today. And thank you again, Dr. BG. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Thank you so much for being here today. Don't forget to leave us a review and subscribe so we can continue to pay it forward together. And remember, the key to longevity is knowledge. Keep learning, growing, and tuning in to the Vibrant Wellness podcast to discover the latest insights and strategies for optimal health. Join us again next week. Just a reminder, this podcast is for educational and informational purposes and is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The views expressed by guest and host are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy of Vibrant Wellness. As always, consult your healthcare provider before applying any recommendations that you heard here today.